All right, so we should be all set. Thank you all so much for joining this evening, taking the time out of your Thursday to hear more about the Oregon Season Tracker program. I really appreciate it. Just for a little bit of housekeeping, as mentioned, I am recording this presentation. That'll be sent out tomorrow with all sorts of resources. It is a small group, but I think it might help if we just want to hold our questions until the end. If anything pops into your head and you really want to get it written down, feel free to type anything into the chat. I probably will hold off onto that until the end, but that is a great place just for kind of question holding. And yeah, we'll move on to our next slide here. So just for a little overview of today's presentation, this isn't a really formal training for Oregon Season Tracker, but instead just really intended to help give you some background about the project, how Oregon Season Tracker started and, what it looks like to be a volunteer, and to see if it feels like a good fit for you. And even if you don't walk away after this as a volunteer, I hope you do learn something about precipitation or phenology and, kind of what those terms are and community science, all that good stuff. So first, I'll kick things off with a little introduction. We'll dive into what is community science, talk about the Oregon Season Tracker program, and then discuss, what's next if you do want to move forward with volunteering with the program. So Oregon Season Tracker has a rich network of partners and volunteers all across the state of Oregon. But the two main points of contact are myself, Sarah. I'm the program coordinator for Oregon Season Tracker, and then Glenn Ahrens as well. And for anyone up here in the Clackamas County area, you might be familiar with Glenn. He's our extension forester. And although we're both based in Clackamas County, we have volunteers, all across Oregon representing more than half our counties in the state. So Glenn, myself, and the Oregon Season Tracker program are housed within Oregon State University Extension's Forestry and Natural Resources program. I pulled some text from the website that I'll read off, and then I'll really explain kind of what that means. So Oregon State University's Forestry and Natural Resources Extension program strives to be the state's leading provider of research-based knowledge and problem-solving educational programs designed to foster new ways to manage and use Oregon's forests wisely. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but really what that means is, our extension programs are really here in the communities, trying to take what we're learning on campus and bringing it to the communities, but also really taking what we're learning in the communities and bringing it back to campus as well. And you might be familiar with some of our other forestry extension programs. I think we have a good number of master naturalists and land stewards. I know some folks from tree school here as well. So those are just a few examples of our other programs. All right, so what is community science? We have kind of a fun array of folks. I know some have participated in community science, some maybe haven't heard of the term before, so we'll just kind of get on the same page there. So there's a lot of definitions and ways to think about community science. One definition that I like is from National Geographic. It refers to community science as the practice of public participation and collaboration in scientific research to increase scientific knowledge. So really just engaging the public and collecting more data. There's a few other kind of common names that it is referred to as. Citizen science is a big one that's been mostly kind of being phased out by organizations. Collaborative science, participatory science. One that I like is people-powered research. So kind of a lot of different definitions and names. And again, it can also just take a lot of different shapes and forms. There might be volunteers that are out monitoring bee populations. We have a lot of that here in Oregon. Might take the shape of someone with a rain gauge in their backyard, like with the Oregon Season Tracker program. Or even my history before coming out to work with Extension was doing trail camera community science work back in Wisconsin. And so if anyone here is a bird nerd, this is a whooping crane, really cool bird that one of our volunteers got on a trail camera. So that is just to say it can take a lot of different shapes, forms, and sizes for community science. And again, a bit of a wordy slide here, but just kind of talking about the histories of community science. And really, it's been a pretty big boom in community science projects in the last 30 years, which has coincided a lot just with, more technology and more ways to reach people and engage them. And the more we're learning that, this is a really good, efficient, and, fun and educational way to do science. one of the first known projects was the Christmas bird count that the National Audubon Society started back in the early 1900s. We had people going out on Christmas Day, just simply looking at the birds and recording what species they're seeing and how many of them they're seeing and where they're seeing them. And it's continued now for, nearly 125 years, and just kind of the history and, seeing how much it's grown since then. But I do also want to acknowledge that, even before we had community science, before we really had what we deem as scientists now, the act of really observing and recording the natural world and the phenomenon really dates back to way before us and back to indigenous communities, including, here in Oregon, here in North America too. So there are many, many, many community science projects out there, but they all do tend to share a few common characteristics. One of those is that they have many people contributing, often over large geographic areas. And having people, spread out that far really does help expand the capacity of researchers to help answer questions. You'll see my top kind of diagram here a bit later in the presentation, but each of those dots represents someone with a rain gauge, and a lot of them here in Oregon are part of the Oregon Season Tracker program. Some other common characteristics are having a standardized scientific protocol, which basically just means, we're all doing the exact same thing, and non-technical data collection. So we don't have super fancy equipment out there on the landscape. It might just take the shape of a plastic rain gauge, or, an ID guide to look at your plants. So often we like to keep it a little more simple. That, of course, makes it more affordable for everyone, but just makes it more accessible to participate too. Lastly, and importantly, a characteristic of community science is that participants benefit from being involved. And really that is a big goal of the Oregon Season Tracker program, is that our volunteers help foster a better understanding of the natural world, and have the chance to really learn by doing with the project. All right, so Oregon Season Tracker, we'll get into it now. So Oregon Season Tracker is a community science program connecting volunteers and researchers throughout Oregon, gathering data on climate. It is a joint project with OSU Extension. Like I mentioned, that's where we're housed, but also two of our local partners, the H.J. Andrews Experimental Research Forest and the PRISM Climate Group. And I'll talk about those two in just a little bit here. You can think of Oregon Season Tracker as a two-pronged project. And so we have volunteers doing two different kinds of tasks. One of that is collecting data on precipitation by monitoring rain gauges. And the other piece is collecting data on plant phenology, which is the seasonal changes of plants. And they do that by just observing some of our kind of native Oregon plants. We have a little short list of species we're interested in. Volunteers can participate in, only one of those two pieces, but we really do encourage both. I think it helps kind of make it a well-rounded experience. And participation can occur just about anywhere. We have some folks that observe in their backyard, some who go to public parks, maybe they're in their woods or on their farm, schools, really just about anywhere where you can get outside. So just to clarify a few terms that you'll hear kind of over and over again, the first is precipitation. This might be one that we're more familiar with, but precipitation just refers to water or the amount of water that falls to the earth as hail, mist, rain, sleet, or snow. And really depending on where you're at in Oregon, the patterns of precipitation are going to look quite a bit different. So pop quiz is always a bit of a jump scare, but this is very, very low stakes, and just kind of an exercise to get you thinking a little bit about precipitation and rainfall in Oregon. So I have two questions here. One is to think about, what is the average annual rainfall for Oregon? If you were to throw a dart at a map, kind of what is the average of what you might see? And my other little question here is to think about some of our Oregon communities, and think about ranking them from highest to lowest annual rainfall. And I know some of these places get more snow than others, but we're just kind of thinking that as the water equivalent like rain. So Speaking of water, I'm going to give myself a water break, and I'll just let you think about that for a quick second here. All right, so again, my low stakes pop quiz. So kind of looking at like average annual rainfall. And the answer is that it is hard to know. It really varies very dramatically based on where you're at in Oregon. But some kind of information I found online is saying that, maybe it's an average of about 43.5 inches of rain per year, which kind of leads into our next little question here of thinking about least or most to least rainfall. And so that just does go to show how dramatically different it can be. We have some spots in the Coast Range where we're seeing upwards of, 90 inches of rain per year. Here, where a lot of us are at in the Willamette Valley, maybe it's more around 40, or even on the dry side of Bend or Eastern Oregon, we're seeing much, much less rainfall. All right, so our other term here, phenology, and I think this is one that probably is a bit newer to folks. So phenology refers to recurring plant and animal life cycle stages that can take the shape of the leafing or the flowering of a tree or a shrub, might look like crops, the maturation of agricultural plants, the emergence of insects, or the migration of birds. I do like this diagram here that looks at an oak tree. I think it just does a nice job of showing kind of those cyclical patterns that we see throughout the year. And while phenology can refer to plants, animals, all sorts of organisms, here at Season Tracker, we do just focus on the plant phenology piece. And similar to with how rainfall can look very different depending on where you're at in Oregon, phenology can look quite a bit different depending on what species or what plant you're looking at. And so I just have two quick examples here. One of them is the vine maple, which is one of our native maples. It's a really beautiful shrub. And throughout the year, we're seeing these different, we call them phenophases, is like a different kind of stage in the phenology and the life cycle of these organisms. But, different phenophases might look like a bud with a fresh leaf. We're seeing that bud break and the leaf emerge. It's expanding, it's growing. We have these beautiful flowers, these fruits. They're called double-winged samaras, but a lot of us like to call them helicopters. And even the changing of the leaf color in the fall is just another kind of one of those stages or phenophases in phenology for the vine maple. Now, if you're looking at a conifer, things are going to look a little bit different or a lot different. And so this is the Douglas fir, our state tree of Oregon, one of our native conifers. And so we're not seeing the same flowers. We're not seeing the leaf color change. And so it just kind of goes to show just that unique life cycle that our different plants here in Oregon have. So we have our buds, but instead they have fresh needles. We have pollen cones, we have seed cones, and we have these delightful ripe cones that I think we're all pretty familiar with on the Douglas fir that we see all over the ground. So now that you know a little bit about the information that volunteers are collecting, I'll talk a little bit about our research partners too. And so these are our two research partners at Oregon State University that really benefit a lot from the work that Oregon Season Trackers do. The first of those is the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. They're a research forest located in the Cascade Mountains in the Willamette National Forest, and they span about 16,000 acres in size. It's a long-term ecological research location, which basically just means they do a whole lot of science out there. They have dozens of researchers looking at kind of all angles of ecology. Our other group is the PRISM Climate Group on campus at Oregon State University. And they gather climate observations from a wide range of monitoring networks to reveal both short and long-term climate patterns. So as mentioned earlier, kind of one of these common themes and benefits of community science is that we have people participating over often large geographic areas. And this is great because geographically, Oregon is a very unique state. And having Oregon Season Trackers spanning across the state of Oregon really helps researchers help better understand patterns and nature across our diverse landscapes. So what kinds of questions are we asking and answering with the Oregon Season Tracker program? One example is looking at, I mentioned our partner, the H.J. Andrews Forest. we can look and see are some of the trends that are identified at the heavily studied H. Andrews Forest, are we seeing those as true across the rest of Oregon? We can look and see, do weather and climate vary over the ecoregions and microclimates of Oregon, and how is that looking in this changing world? We can also ask questions like, how do plants respond and adapt to different weather and climate conditions? And I like that one because it kind of pulls together those two pieces of the Oregon Season Tracker program. So you heard a little bit about our two local partners at Oregon State University, but we also work with two larger, well-established organizations, COCO-RAS, which stands for the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, and the National Phenology Network and their Nature's Notebook program. And there's a lot of benefits to working with these two groups. One is that we have a more kind of centralized place to collect data. We're all looking to collect the same information, and this really helps us from reinventing the wheel. There also is open access to this data. That doesn't mean that someone can go get, your name or your address or your email, any of that information. That's all protected. But if someone is doing a research study and they're looking at rainfall in Oregon, they're able to access information from those research partners, which in turn really expands the research power of the work that Oregon Season Trackers do. And lastly, these groups have a lot of great staff and funding to make training materials and educational materials. And so working with them really helps open a lot of resources for Oregon Season Trackers as well. So I'll dive a little bit into those two partners, first starting with COCO-RAS, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And we work with them on the precipitation piece of the Oregon Season Tracker program. They're based out of Colorado, and they've been a nationwide project for over 25 years. They have volunteers across the United States and Canada who are reporting daily precipitation. Volunteers can report their data, their rainfall information, either on a computer or a smartphone. And the data has really far-reaching impacts. One of them is the PRISM Climate Group that I mentioned at Oregon State University and their work on plant hardiness zones. I think we have a lot of master gardeners who might be more familiar with those. The data helps the USDA with climate modeling, weather predictions, and even goes to the National Weather Service as well. And there's a few parts of participating with the precipitation piece that you do once, and there's a couple that you do over and over again. So the first one is to purchase a rain gauge. And so volunteering with Oregon Season Tracker is free, but it does require the purchase of a COCO-RAS approved rain gauge. So that's a one-time purchase. I'll get into some of those details on that later on. But that's kind of one of our one-time items. Also, setting out your rain gauge, finding a good location for it to stay in one spot, and then setting up an online account. And this is all covered in depth in our online training too. So those are kind of our one-time pieces. And then there's a handful of things that you just kind of do over and over again. You're visiting your rain gauge and looking at, how much it rained last night, checking that daily precipitation. Ideally daily, it is flexible. You are recording that information. You might be putting it on a paper sheet. You might just be entering it straight online. And yeah, just kind of filling out that information of the date, the time, the amount of rainfall, and any other details you have to share. One neat thing about volunteering with the precipitation piece with COCO-RAS is they have this really cool map that they update daily. I'm realizing I haven't updated it since Tuesday, but this is, every day as reports come in, they will update this map up until about 9:30 a.m. And so it just does give a cool kind of daily snapshot of what rainfall looked like, in the last 24 hours across the country. And you can even zoom in. Like I said, no names, no addresses, nothing like that, but you can see your dot. You can see kind of your rainfall. And I think that's just a neat part of COCO-RAS. So our other partner is the National Phenology Network and their Nature's Notebook program. Nature's Notebook and NPN, they're based out of Arizona, and they've been running for about 15 years. They look at phenology and reporting phenophases for both plants and animals, but as mentioned here at Oregon Season Tracker, we really just do focus on that plant piece. Similar to COCO-RAS, you can report information on a computer, or they do have a smartphone app as well. And like cocoa raws, again, the data really does have far-reaching impacts. I mentioned the H.J. Andrews Forest. They're the ones really interested in this phenology data, but it also helps researchers just better understand plant and animal phenology, help identify potential shifts in phenology, and even making predictions as well. Kind of a similar slide here where there's a couple of things you do once, there's a couple of things you do over and over. So one piece is, identifying a location, they call it a site, where you're going to be observing. Then you are picking a plant from our priority plant list. I'll get into that. And then really just setting up your account and everything online and getting yourself ready. The things you do on repeat is visiting that site. We do recommend, kind of picking a place close to home, make it nice and convenient for you. And recording and observing the different phenophases, the different kind of annual stages of the plant that you're seeing. Ideally, they ask folks to go out maybe, every week, every other week. But again, a really nice part of this program is just how flexible that is too. So as you're out there, you're recording your phenophases. You can do that on a paper sheet. You can just do it straight online. And again, you're just kind of entering some of those basic details like the date, the time, and any optional details. And they try to make it a little easier for you. They do have these nice data sheets, and these are species specific. So I gave our example of the vine maple earlier. So if, for example, you are observing a vine maple, they will go ahead and already tell you what potential phenophases or kind of life stages that you're looking for. And so with our vine maple, we're seeing, maybe breaking leaf buds, maybe we're seeing increasing leaf size, and these aren't mutually exclusive. Oftentimes you're seeing multiple phenophases happening at the same time. And I, of course, love their question mark feature. Some of this is, maybe feels like a bit of a learning curve as you're getting started, but it is a no pressure. You can say yes, you can say no, or you can say, hey, maybe I'm not sure, and I'll check back in a week and say, oh yeah, no, that was actually a flower bud. So there's also a lot of really great learning resources and materials to help as well that I'll dive a little into. And then just kind of to bring that full circle, we're looking at the Douglas fir again, and just this idea that, it can look a lot different depending on what plant you're looking at. And you can even give fun nicknames to your plants. We didn't pick fun ones. We have vine maple 2 and Douglas fir 1, but that's just kind of another piece you can do too. Kind of like our cocoa raws map. This isn't a year-round piece, but something I do look forward to is seeing the status of spring maps. And so this is just one of the outputs from the National Phenology Network, and some of this data is coming from our Oregon Season Tracker volunteers, but just kind of tracking and predicting the status of spring, I think is kind of a neat output too. And I mentioned we have some priority species. We're lucky to have a lot of plants here in Oregon, but we do try to narrow it down. This list comes from both species that are pretty commonly found throughout. This is our Western Oregon side, and that really helps us to be able to make some, comparisons across volunteer locations. And so vine maple has a couple stars there. That's one that we're really always trying to get. That's a huge species of interest at our partner, the H.J. Andrews Forest. Other plants include big leaf maple, cottonwood, Douglas fir, Oregon white oak, ponderosa pine, common snowberry, and Pacific ninebark. For those on the east side, we have a couple east side species as well. We have quaking aspen, rabbit brush, big sagebrush, and antelope bitterbrush. And for those who may not be as much of plant wizards, I know I come from a bird and wildlife background, so we do have some nice resources, or at least these are some I recommend for, kind of learning more about plants. And it's a really great time of year to start looking at plants. Last year we did these webinars in January where there's no leaves on anything, and so this time of year definitely makes it a little easier for you. But some publications from Extension that I really like, we have a Trees to Know book, a Shrubs to Know book, a few that aren't with Extension. The plants of the Pacific Northwest coast, I just hear people rave about that all the time. Even though it says the Northwest coast, it really does, kind of expand further into Oregon. And there's even a smartphone app called Seek by iNaturalist, which does a pretty great job of identifying plants kind of on the fly. And to make it even full circle, it's powered by a community science project called iNaturalist. So that's a fun one to play around with. I always recommend just kind of double checking because sometimes they give you some really weird answers, but it usually does a pretty good job of helping you identify plants. So that's a fun one. There's also a lot of resources built into both the Oregon Season Tracker website and also the Nature's Notebook website, both to help you with identifying plants, but also identifying phenophases, because this really is something that is a little bit newer, I think, to a lot of our volunteers. And so, yeah, we do want everyone to succeed. And so we try to build in a lot of great resources there, including pictures, descriptions, and they also have some really great, they call them primers, which kind of gives you just like a botany or phenology 101. And those are all resources on the Nature's Notebook website, and these are all linked in the online training as well. I will say too that Oregon Season Tracker can provide some really meaningful opportunities to get students involved as well, both simply by participating, but also through some other resources they have available. And Coco Roz and Nature's Notebook both have teams, devoted to making educational resources and lesson plans, and they're for really all ages. But there's other ways you can tie in education, both for yourself, for family, things like nature journaling. You can make little flashcards or quizzes. And Coco Roz has some fun activities on their YouTube with like creating your own weather. I haven't explored that one too much, but I do think that one would be a whole lot of fun. All right, so that is my little spiel about Oregon Season Tracker. And then I want to talk to you a little bit here too about, what's next. If this does sound like it might be a good match for your interests, if you want to maybe just take a stab at the online training, or if you are gung-ho and you're going to go get your rain gauge, this is kind of what those next steps would look like. And so the Oregon Season Tracker training is currently fully online. We do estimate it takes about 2 hours to complete, but if you sat through this webinar, it's probably going to go a lot quicker because you know what to expect. It also is at your own pace. It doesn't have to be done in one sitting, and it continues to be available even after you've completed it to go back and look at for different resources. As mentioned, the purchase of a rain gauge, here's a nice little picture with the rainbow and one of the rain gauges. So that is required if you do want to monitor rainfall. Usually they're on a bit of a better sale, but right now they're $42 plus shipping from Weather Your Way is the official kind of rain gauge creator for Coco Roz. We do also have some, I purchased a bunch in bulk. So here at the OSU Extension Office in Clackamas County, we're able to offer them for $30. If anyone's not in the area, we can look into offering shipping too. So that might just save a little bit of money on that too. As far as time commitment goes, these are just kind of estimates. It really does vary person to person, how far away your rain gauge is, how far away your plants are. But I would say, for precipitation, for me, it's on my back deck. It probably takes me, I walk past it every day. I just quick, look, record my rainfall, dump my water out, pull out my phone. It only takes a minute or two. And ideally, folks are doing this daily, but as we'll talk about in the online training, there is a lot of flexibility if that's not possible, or if you forget, that happens too. For phenology, that one's a little more involved. I would say maybe 15 minutes per observation, probably a bit more time in the start. And then kind of once you get to know your plant and once you get a little more comfortable with the procedures, probably goes a little bit more quickly. And again, that one in an ideal world is weekly or bi-weekly, but again, there is some flexibility there as well. And so although the training is fully online, I do offer, we call them skill building sessions, a couple times throughout the year. And so these are just really designed to help kind of supplement the online training, to kind of give a time for question and answer, and even just kind of addressing some frequently asked questions that I tend to hear, or pointing out new resources. So I have a couple of those coming up. One about precipitation and Coco Roz, that'll be Wednesday, April 24th at noon. And then one with Nature's Notebook and phonology, and that'll be the following Tuesday, April 30th at noon. The signups for those, I'll link in my resources I send out. They're also on the season tracker website. And I'll definitely record those as well. I know noon might not be the most convenient time for some folks. So if you aren't able to attend, but you want a recording, would recommend signing up for those too. And with that, I have a couple just quotes from volunteers that I really like, which I think just to summarize this slide, it's people coming from a lot of backgrounds to Oregon Season Tracker who are interested in a lot of different things and getting a lot of kind of different pieces out of the project. And so, some people are a gardener and they just want to kind of get more familiar with how much water, how much rain is coming in and how much should they, water their garden. Just interested in being part of a research study, kind of learning more about your surroundings or, taking part in this advancement of scientific knowledge. And so that just is to say, folks coming from a lot of backgrounds, and I think you can get, a lot of kind of different experiences out of Season Tracker based on your interests. And with that, I just have a little thank you slide, and I am more than happy to take any questions that folks might have at this time. So if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute. Otherwise, if you want to drop anything in the chat, I can read those from there as well. So yeah, thank you again so much. And if you have any questions, yeah, fire away. Question, is there a way we can tell if there are already observers near us? So I showed that map from CocoRa's that updates daily with precipitation, and you can get pretty fine-grained with that one. So I can see like, oh, there's someone else on my block who's observing. But again, it won't tell names or anything like that. Similarly, the National Phonology Network, they also have an interactive, and I didn't even go into that, but they have an interactive map where you can also kind of pull information and you can generally see where volunteers are. So yes, you have to like sleuth a little bit and it won't tell you who, but you can see if data is being collected near you. Oh, these are such great questions. Okay. Question here is, I have a very small yard, cannot get twice as far as tall from my house. Will that be okay? Yes, absolutely. And so Julie's referring to when you go through the training for CocoRa's, that's the rain gauge piece. They have this like dream list of, we want you to think about how tall your house is. We want you to be, twice as far away. We want you to be not close to a fence post. They have this really dream list that in reality, a lot of us don't have, and that is okay. My rain gauge, I've tested a few spots. I found one that works pretty well. It's definitely not that perfect distance away, and they do understand that, but you can just kind of take that as guidance for, okay, I want to get, maybe as far away from a building as possible, but still in a place that's convenient for you. So I'm happy to, like, if you want to take a picture of your yard, if you want to kind of talk through that, happy to. But yeah, I would not be too worried about that unless if you have like a crazy narrow, like it has to be up against a building, but really big ones are like, you don't want it to be under an overhang or somewhere that'll really block rainfall, like from the top down. Another question, is it possible to start any time of the year? Yes, absolutely. We have volunteers, starting whenever. It's just kind of when it's convenient for you. So for rainfall, it's nice to start when it's raining. So usually starting kind of in any time but the summer makes it a lot more interesting for the first stretch. And yeah, the same with phonology. And two, if you have a seasonal job or if you're going on a vacation, these are things too you can kind of pick up and put down. You're not signing up for a specific time commitment. So it is like really emphasize kind of the flexibility part is something that's really nice about both of these projects and why we wanted to work with them for Season Tracker. All right, another question here. So I have several snowberry and vine maples in my garden. They are all either near my house or a fence against small yard. So that's another one. As you go through the training, I told you kind of, yeah, Coco Roz has their dream list of locations for your rain gauge. Likewise, the National Phenology Network has kind of their dream list for plants. And so they tell you, you want to be at least, I think, 10 or 20 feet away from a building and a road. And I think somewhere it references a fence as well. I actually talked to the folks today just to clarify that, and they said, yeah, if you can get away from a road or a building, that's great. But again, not everyone can do that. So it's really doing your best. The National Phenology Network, when you set up your observation site and you tell them what plant you're observing, you get a whole checklist of questions like, are you watering this plant? Are you fertilizing this plant? Is it within a certain distance? Like you do get to, kind of help tell them some of the caveats about your location. So, yeah, I'm happy to kind of follow up on that too, but they have these dream lists that they also know, not everyone can follow. So I would say the fence of all of those is definitely the least concern, but trying to keep away from kind of roads or buildings or things that might produce heat can influence the phenology and the timing, but a fence is much less likely to do that. So a question here. I open the Nature's Notebook app and I get a message that says its server can't load to my mobile phone. Ellen, let's follow up on that. I'm gonna make myself a note. I was using it earlier today on my phone and it worked good. So we will troubleshoot that one together, if that's okay. Is there a time commitment, like 1 year? So in short, no. When we're looking at things like, climate and phenology, it really does help to have these long-term data sets. So it's beneficial if you do, like, the longer you participate, the better, but there definitely isn't a commitment because, like I said, we have a lot of people are accessing this data. Some people are just literally looking for a snapshot in time. And so if someone only volunteers for a week or a month or 6 months, like odds are that information is going to be useful to someone. It might not be useful to someone else. But also, even if you only volunteer for a couple months, that might be really useful to you and help you with learning. So no, there is not a time commitment, but it is beneficial, I think, to volunteers and to kind of researchers to participate. Yeah, as long as it makes sense for you, but no. Oh, great. And there's a question about, do they need to be not watered? And yeah, that was answered. So totally fine if you water a plant that you're observing. And like I mentioned, you'll have the chance to let them know and give them a heads up. I'm drawing a blank on all the questions they ask, but they really do try to, really understand your site. And I think both Coco Roz and Nature's Notebook, you even have a textbook entry. Like I think I put like, sorry, it's on my balcony. I don't have a yard, like to kind of tell them, what your situation is, and then they can kind of make do with that as they will. These are really great questions. Thank you all. Any other questions that come to mind? Otherwise, you have my email address. So I'm always happy to, hop on a Zoom, get on the phone, answer questions over email too. All right. Yes, thank you so much. Again, I really appreciate you all jumping on. I know it's kind of late in the evening, but yeah, again, really great questions. I really appreciate all of your time. I'll send out this recording tomorrow and I'll have a whole bunch of resources like the training. The Seek app is always fun, so I'll share out all those goodies tomorrow. So yay, excited for you to do it too, Julie. All right. Thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. All right.